Hello viewers, this is Charles and this is the next in my series Learn Programming and Game Development with Lua. In this tutorial I'm going to look at tables and I'm also going to look at generic for loops. Tables are the only composite data type in Lua. A composite data type allows you to represent something like a character or a pickup or the coordinates of an object in 2D or 3D space. So if you define a two-dimensional coordinate, it'll have two components, an x component, which in Lua is a number, and a y component, which is also a number. And you could represent that coordinate with a table. In other languages, you have a number of different types of collections. You have arrays, and you have vectors, and you have lists, and other types. But in Lua, all those types can be represented in tables. Now, from one point of view, that makes Lua quite simple because you only need to worry about tables. But from another point of view, if you're coming from another language, it can be slightly confusing because you might be looking for arrays or lists or vectors and you can't find them because Lua doesn't have them. It implements them by using tables. Now, this will become a lot clearer once we start making some examples. So that's what we're going to do now. I've started by copying in a comment and I'm actually going to output that in the output using a print statement. So let's do that now. So let's go print and open parentheses and then paste by Control V, close the quotation marks and then close the brackets. Now we're going to create a table in Lua. Before I do that, I'm going to actually print a blank line because I think that'll make the output a bit easier to read. So I'm going to create an empty table called my table. Now let's print out the type of my table to just prove that it is actually a table. So I'm using the type function to do this. So I simply type type and then parentheses the variable, which is my table, and then close the brackets and then close the print brackets. I'm going to print an empty line again. That just spaces things out, and I'm now going to run this. Now, if you look at the output, you can see the type of my table is table. I'm going to zoom in and make the font a bit bigger. And I do that by going Control and then plus. And with a little bit of luck, then that should make it easier to read depending on what you're playing back on. So let's do the second example. So again, I'm going to copy paste into the output and you'll see why in a minute. Let's put the stop there. I'm going to create a table and populate it at the same time. And the way you do that is we're going to have it local. We're going to call it second table. And then we open curly braces and we type in the items we want, comma separated. Now these are the strings because they're the names of the animals. We're going to start with dog and then we'll have cat, we'll have 3 of them, and then we'll have fox. And then we close the brackets using the right type of bracket, and that's done. Now the indices for this table are created automatically. We don't have to specify them. And the indices will be 1 for dog, 2 for cat, and 3 for fox. So because the keys are numbers, we can use a numeric for loop to print out the entries in this table. So let's see what that looks like. So here, because I know there's 3 entries, I've put 3 and then we can run it and it's simply going to print out the entries in the table. And to get the actual entries, you put the index in square brackets after the name of the table variable. So let's run it and see what happens. You can see we print out dog, cat and fox. So far so good. But suppose we had a longer list. You might not want to rely on correctly counting the number in the list. Well, there's an alternative. Providing that your table is using numerical indices, numbers for the indices, then you can use the pound sign and the table name. So let's run that again to demonstrate that it works. And you can see we get the same result. So just to recap, here we've defined a second table and we've populated it by providing the entries inside curly braces. And by the way, those entries don't have to be primitive data types such as numbers or strings. They could be another table, but I think that's a subject for a subsequent lecture. There's another way to iterate through the table and output results, and that is to use a generic for loop. So let's actually just write one and then it'll be pretty clear how it works. So we start with the keyword for, and then we have K for key, comma, and then V for value, and then we need in and then pairs, and then we need the name of the table, which is second table, and then we can actually do, if we go do, we can then output the results. But of course now we have access to the keys because they're in K as well as the values. So we can actually print both out, which is useful. Concatenation operator and then K. Concatenation operator, then we want comma space and then we want the value. We'll type value, if we can spell. Let's type value, V, just to remind us what it is. And then concatenation operator and then V and then close the brackets and then end and then print another line. Let's run this to see if it works. If I scroll up, you can see this time we print the keys and you can see they're 1, 2, 3 and then the values for those keys. So what's going on here? Well, pairs is taking out the key value pairs, and then this gives us access to the keys and the values, which is why we need two variables here. And then we're simply concatenating them into the print statement. And you can see this is a very powerful way of iterating over your table. Now, as an aside, I just want to talk about naming conventions in Lua and other programming languages. So what I've been using in this tutorial is called snake case, and snake case simply means you replace the spaces between words, because you're not allowed to have spaces in variable names and other identifier names, with underscore. So if we were to make another variable and we wanted it to be a third table, we'd do it like this. So that's snake case, but you'll often see, so you ought to know about it, camel case. Now in camel case, we get rid of the spaces altogether and we capitalize every word except the first word. So third table would look like this. Finally, the other one you might come across is Pascal case. Pascal case is like camel case, but the first letter is capitalized as well. So it would look like this. So to recap, snake case, you simply replace the spaces with underscore. Camel case, you get rid of the space and capitalize every word except the first word. And Pascal case, you capitalize every word. I'm going to delete that, but it's worth bearing in mind. What I want to do now is to take my table, which is empty, and then get some values into it. So that's going to be example 3. Let's see how that happens. Let's leave a blank line. So how would you add entries to my table, which is currently empty? Well, it's quite easy. You do it like this. We type my table, then we open square brackets, then we use, I'm going to use letters. So I'm going to use like a coordinates. I'm going to use X, and then I close the square brackets, and then I put equal, and then the number 200. So we'll have X as 200, and then we can do Y as well. The second way you could do it is you could create local variables and then use those to create table entries. Let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to call it key_03. And we're going to call that Z, and then the value, local value _03, we're going to be 400. And then to add that, we simply go my table, and this time we simply put key03 equals, and then value 03. The reason you would want to do this is if you were getting input, for instance, from the user of your program, then you would get the input, store it in a variable, and then add it to the table. So you'd need to create the variables, get the input into them, and then put it in the table. Let's try and print out the entries in my table using a numeric for loop. And then we can see what the limitations are of using numeric for loops in Lua. Now this won't work, but to prove it, I think I ought to run it. And you can see it didn't work. We didn't print anything out. How would you troubleshoot this? That's perhaps a useful skill to learn in coding, is actually, well, how do you find out why it's not working? And there's a very easy first starting point, and that's simply, why don't we print out this? So let's see what this actually is. By going print, I've done copy paste and print it out. So let's see what we get. 0. The reason it doesn't work is the pound sign with a table only works if the table uses numbers for the indices, and this table does not. It's using strings. But of course we can use a generic for loop to do this. So let's do that. And we need comma space so that the formatting is correct, and then end, and then the normal printer spare line. Now let's run it, and this one we expect to work. I'm thinking, yes, that's fine. So let's do that. So what you can see from the output is the generic for loop works, and it prints out the keys and values as expected, and you don't need to know the number of elements or the length of your table. And that, of course, is why we have generic for loops. There's one final thing I want to show in this tutorial, and that is the use of the dot operator. So I'm going to use the dot operator to print out the value of x from our coordinate. And it's very simple. You simply go dot and then X, and that's it. Except we hadn't put in the concatenation operator, so let's do that. And then close the brackets, and then let's run it. And we've got an error. So why is that not working? Because we've got an additional quotation mark. Let's get rid of that. And now it works. Because you can see the value of X is 200. Now what won't work is this. And you can see it doesn't. If you want to use the square bracket notation, then you need to specify that it's a string with double or single quotation marks. And to put it back to the dot operator. I think this is a good place to wrap up. There's more things you can do with tables, but I think we can cover those as we go along. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, please consider clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Have a great day.